Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night, it is your boy, the Horror Lander, and I'm back today to talk about something that I always love talking about, and that's my favorite horror author, Tim Curran. But this one is specifically near and dear to my heart, and why is that? Because I'm going to be talking about something very rare and exclusive involving my favorite book that Tim Curran ever came out with. Now, no shocker to anybody, I love Tim Curran's work. He has a lot of fantastic short stories out there. He has a couple great novels out there and some standalone novellas. But there's one book out of them all that I really think is novel, no pun intended, and I think that I love it out of his entire catalog the most. But the book that I love the most out of them all is Horrors of War. Now, I made a review of Horrors of War on my channel, so you can go to the playlist. For some reason, YouTube lists my Tim Curran playlist in the podcast section. I'm not sure why it's listed as podcast, but if you click on it, you can scroll down and see my review of the original book. But today I'm going to be talking about a special edition, an extended edition that I got my hands on at the same time that I was able to officially read the book. And this extended edition came with 3 exclusive stories in it. And unfortunately, they're not readily available. So because it's so rare, because it's such an expensive edition of the book, I think that I'm in fact the very first person to ever talk about and uncover at least 2 of these stories today. If you go on any bibliography website or online place that claims to know all of, an author's stories, these 2 are not mentioned anywhere on the internet as far as I'm concerned, and there's no reviews about them, so I'm kind of an innovator in that sense. Horrors of War is basically a short story collection dealing with historical fiction horror. Yes, the whole book has several different war periods that Tim Curran selects as the settings and focus of each of these short stories, but he throws in creature feature, supernatural, occult stuff to make it weird fiction, to make it weird war stories, and his inspiration behind doing so, to keep it pretty short, was that he had some family members who served in the military and used to come back telling strange stories about what they saw out in the war, and he used to be a big fan of EC Comics growing up, and he read a magazine called, I think, Weird War Tales or something like that, which obviously, as the name implies, is weird fiction war horror stories. So he decided to take a crack at it, and all the short stories and Horrors of War take place throughout many different war periods. You have World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Napoleonic War with the French, you have the Native American War, you even have the Mongolians. That's right, you follow the bloodthirsty Mongol warrior savages in one of the short stories as well. But there was an extended edition through a hardcover slipcase that was limited to, I think, 30 copies or less, and you have to pay anywhere between like $80 to $150. Luckily, I got it as a graduation gift from my mother, so I love you infinitely. So despite it being very rare, I was able to get my hands on it for free, basically. And it comes with 3 exclusive stories in there. The 3 exclusive stories is Ear to Ear, Scarface, and The Cannibal King. I'll be giving full spoilers because since the book is so rare and expensive, I don't think anyone's going to be able to get their hands really on this. So I'll be talking about all the stories throughout. And of course, despite not being able to get this extended edition unless you're willing to spend the money or you're a hardcore fan, you can still pick up the regular Horrors of War book, either on Kindle or as a paperback, and I would still say read through all those stories because some of Tim Curran's best work comes from Horrors of War, particularly The Chattering of Tiny Teeth and a novella called 1867, The Skull Eater Campaign. Those 2 are bangers. Without further ado, let's dive in. Ear to Ear is the only reprinted short story out of these 3. Ear to Ear takes place in the Korean War. So you have U.S. Marine soldiers who are riding through the jungle. They're basically truck transport. They're delivering medical supplies, weapons, and that kind of stuff to nearby bases. And out in the perimeter of the jungle, there's artillery shells going off, soldier shootouts, people screaming. But they got an emergency task that they have to dive in. Despite being only truck transport and relatively green and unexperienced, there is a U.S. Marine base that's basically gone black. No communication has come out of it. All signals have been cut, and it's suspected that the North Korean army has taken out that group of soldiers. But this truck transport being nearby, these group of a dozen men or so are chosen to go out there and investigate armed and see if there's any survivors, what exactly happened, and report back. And of course, these guys are very scared. It's the middle of the night. On the radio comm, there's this propaganda channel with this woman named, I think, Pyongyang Peggy, who's basically a radio host that's listing off all the U.S. Marine soldiers and people who have died during the war so far to kind of do psychological warfare on the soldiers who are still alive. And right away, there's something strange about it because one of the men comments that, how are they keeping track of all these things? They're so meticulous. And eventually, after them kind of being scared and nervous, they do end up arriving to the U.S. Marine base in the middle of this jungle, and they see that there is a strange, eerie silence. There is a malignant atmosphere all around this base, and they figure that it might be too late, but they still have to investigate. So Stokely, who's the main character, the leader of the group, ends up breaking out the soldiers into different functions, and they start going around the base trying to look for survivors. And him and his man essentially go down to, I guess, the main barracks. And as he's going down there and using his flashlight and, armed and ready, he swears that he can smell the sweet decomposition of a rotting corpse. And he thinks that there might be some strange, shadowy, liquidous movement happening down there. But when he gets down there and shines his flashlight, there's nothing, and the smell quickly disappears. But when he goes to the desk that the main commander is supposed to be sitting at, he sees a grisly sight, and that's that the main commander has his throat slit from ear to ear, hence the title. It almost looks like he has two mouths. One is his actual mouth frowning, and the other one is this brand new wide grin that's cut across his neck. And quickly when he looks around, he sees some other folks, other soldiers inside this barracks who also have their throats slit. And one of them is smoking a cigarette, and the cigarette has burnt down, but he's bleeding out of his neck. So you start getting the strange suspicion that it almost looks like that these guys had cut their own necks. It almost looks like they committed suicide. They slit open their own throats in the middle of whatever they were doing. And quickly he starts getting scared. And there's this song by Joe Stafford, I think, called You Belong to Me, which all of a sudden cues up and starts blasting throughout the radio speakers across this camp. And it makes it for a very eerie and creepy atmosphere. Maybe you'll be lonesome too. And quickly, as they investigate some more and he gets some radio calls from his other team members, they see that this type of phenomenon happened to all the U.S. Marines throughout the camp. They see that there's guys who are sleeping on their bed cots and it looks like they woke up in the middle of the night and just slit their throats open. There's people at the lunch hall who look like they were in the middle of eating their food, their sandwiches, their MREs, and they got their K-bar knives and did the deed. And right away they realize that something is very off. And when he gets back down to the barracks to steal some diaries and some recon information to take back to the headquarters, he sees that the corpses have moved. Okay, their expressions have changed. The main guy who was sitting at the desk is now grinning and staring right at him, and same as the other three dead bodies. And he starts freaking out, and he realizes that his team members have now had some weird thing take over them, and now they're starting to slit their throats because as they're trying to escape and start up the trucks, they feel like they can see some entity moving out there in the shadows. They hear sounds of stuff running by that sounds like moth-eaten tarps, and that causes these other men to start taking out their knives and killing themselves. The main character ends up reasonably getting very scared, and as he tries to leave, he hears that there's objects falling over in the barracks. When he's running onto the tent, he hears that there are people getting off the bed cots. So the people who are supposed to be dead, maybe there's something more to them. And he eventually gets to the truck and he's about to escape, but he sees that all the drivers and people inside have slit their throats. And eventually he hears a noise from behind him, and it is the voice of Pyongyang Peggy in a very hissy, screechy fashion that he heard from the propaganda radio. And when he turns around, Unfortunately, Tim Curran does not give you a full explanation or full scene involving the monster. You don't really know what it is. He gives some brief, kind of vague details that it seems to be this napalm, smoldering, steaming, I guess, corpse of a woman or some female entity. You don't know what it is, and that's unfortunately a downside. But as he sees her, he immediately starts grinning and then cuts open his throat as she recites the verse of the song by Joe Stafford that's playing, "You belong to me." And that's where the story ends, with him slitting his throat and her saying that. So that's the story. I'd give this one a 6.5 out of 10, a decent. It's very atmospheric. It's very creepy. Curran's really good at that immersive writing, that creepy atmosphere. I felt very nervous and unnerved throughout the entire story, really scared about what these guys are dealing with. The imagery of soldiers having their throats slashed ear to ear, and it looks like they're grinning like two different smiles, is quite morbid. And I do like the idea of some entity, that's been tampering with the soldiers now psychologically and, physically messing with them. But again, the fact that he did not show you the actual monster, he gave some vague details and kind of cut it off before he actually revealed this big thing and what actually was going on. It felt a little bit too abruptly cut, but I do like the ending, even though it's kind of predictable. So it gets a light decent. Could have been better, but it is what it is. I wish he would have taken some different direction. The next story is Scarface. This one takes place in the Vietnam War. You open up with a sniper duo, a U.S. Marine sniper duo, who are planting an ambush on a group of Vietnamese soldiers that are staking out in this jungle camp. And as they're doing it, the main guy, whose name is Stone, he's very much like a John Bernthal Punisher kind of guy, one of the deadliest snipers and, most killer soldiers in the U.S. Marine Corps, taking names, a Call of Duty kind of badass. And as he's looking at the scope of his sniper, and his guy next to him, who I think is named Barbadillo, is using a telescopic sight to look at the enemy soldiers, Stone ends up seeing something very strange, and that's that all the soldiers look like your typical very novice Vietnamese men, but behind them is this giant hulking rotting corpse, almost 7 foot tall, rotting zombified corpse of a soldier that apparently has been haunting them for these past months. And you find out that it's a guy named Scarface. That's his nickname for this entity, because it's a rotting, maggoty corpse, 7 foot tall, almost like 400 pounds of muscle, but it's got these, very deep cuts all throughout its face. And he's apparently killed this guy several times before. You find out that this rotting corpse zombie kind of ghost thing keeps on appearing periodically. He'll snipe it and kill it during one mission, and it'll come back the next time. It's almost like a curse. It's been plaguing him. So this time, him and his boy basically shoot down and gun down all the soldiers, and they immediately race down there to check. And Barbadillo is unable to see Scarface. He's not able to perceive it, not able to smell it. And then when Stone gets down there, he immediately sees and makes sure that everyone's dead, but then he tries to go and look for Scarface, and there's no evidence of him. It looks like there's no sign of him. But when he gets to the perimeter of the jungle, he sees that there's a massive footprint in the mud, and him and his boy basically run out there into the jungle, try looking for Scarface, and Barbadillo thinks that Stone might be losing it, but Stone's like, no, I know I saw this entity. I know I saw this guy. I gotta take him down for good. And he sees him on top of the hill at the jungle, this shadowy silhouette that ends up darting back into the green foliage. So it becomes a game of cat and mouse. He's being dealt with by this entity named Scarface, and he needs to hunt him down before he might become the hunted. So him and his guy end up hunting down Scarface, and you find out that Stone has some dark secrets of his past that kind of keep slowly getting alluded to throughout the story, which is that Essentially, Scarface used to be this Vietnamese commander named Colonel Fang, and Colonel Fang was pretty notorious amongst the U.S. Marines. He was very cruel. He often killed, Vietnamese peasants and villagers, and at the same time, he would essentially kill U.S. Marines and then trophy hunt them. He'd cut off their heads, cut off their ears, and take them as trophies. So he had kind of a bounty on him. He had a wanted kind of notorious reputation to him, and they decided to send in Stone because Stone was the best sniper to go assassinate Colonel Fang. And Colonel Fang had decided to hide out in a village with innocent villagers, and at that time the main character had a different commander who led them in there named Mad Jack, and they ended up getting power hungry. They ended up getting fed by the propaganda of the Vietnam War, and they became bloodthirsty savages. And they ended up abusing their rights because what they do is that they genocide all the innocent villagers, men, women, and children, to hunt down Colonel Fang and eventually do kill him. But they, basically break their ethical standard, their moral code, and they end up committing this genocide. And it's kind of put under the books. It's not talked about, but Stone has always had it in the back of his mind, and ever since then Colonel Fang has kept returning as this Scarface giant zombie ghost kind of thing. And as they're running through the jungle, eventually what happens is that Stone ends up getting bitten by a bamboo viper and ends up getting envenomated. And when he tries to look for his boy, he's run ahead of him and he can't find him. And when he eventually does find Barbadillo, he sees that he ended up triggering a booby trap. It was called like a Malayan gate, which is these bamboo stakes that end up flying upward after he triggered a tripwire, and he's got these bamboo stakes through his chest and his stomach. So his, best friend is basically bleeding out in front of him and is dead. And when he looks closer upon his friend's corpse, he sees that his ears have been cut off, which gives evidence that Scarface was the one responsible for planting this trap and then trophy hunting off his friend. So feeling infuriated, he keeps on, running through the jungle, and he decides to set up an ambush on Scarface. He gathers up weapons, assault rifles, his sniper, an incendiary grenade, and he ends up waiting in a common animal trail, hoping that Scarface is going to try to come up to him. And eventually Scarface does. And he ends up attacking him, viciously, shooting him down, severing him, doing all this crazy stuff. And when he does so, it ends up turning out to be very bad because, Scarface is very clear to identify, again, a 7-foot-tall rotting corpse of a man, all your typical zombie stuff, cadaver type of grin. One of his eye sockets is missing and squirming with maggots, and he's got this bleached white eye, and he's sun-dried and stinks. But in a moment's flash, as he's gutting open Scarface and trying to make sure that he's going to kill him, so he's about to shove a grenade down his throat, he then sees this kind of heat wave mirage effect happen, and he realizes that who he attacked was not Scarface. It was in fact another U.S. Marine who happened to be on the path. And very quickly he realizes that this is one of Scarface's tricks, and he thinks back to some urban legends there are about these witches in this Vietnam jungle who have the ability to, do your typical sort of witchcraft, black magic stuff where they can poison crops and heal people and summon demons and also raise the dead. So he suspects that because he himself is a wanted Marine amongst the Vietnamese army, they may have contacted some occult witches and planted this curse on him. So immediately he starts freaking out and running through the jungle. As he's running through, he sees the dead body of his best friend Barbadillo rise out of the muck. And that dude has, all the holes with dirty water poking out of him. He looks, morbid and rotted, and he's got bamboo vipers that are slithering out of his holes in his mouth. He's got green leeches hanging out off of him like the teats of a cow. And he's basically joking with them while this, gunky water and mud is flowing out of him. He's telling them like, in a almost voice that sounds like somebody's drowning. He's like, hey, you remember that old guy Jim I used to run with? That crazy motherfucker. He never knew when to stay dead. He was always running around and killing folks and writhing in blood. Talk about one crazy dinky duke. And right away, that sight, mortifies Stone, and eventually he ends up getting caught by some Vietnamese soldiers who end up beating him down, and he's still plagued by the visions. He sees that there is an army of the undead, the villagers that he killed, all rotting men, women, and children, and green-faced crawling babies trying to get him. And at that time, after a gunfight breaks out, some U.S. Marines end up finding the camp, and they find Stone, and they explain that this guy's been missing for a week and he seems to be killed in action. So right away he starts freaking out. He's like, there's no way I've been gone for a week. There's no way I've been missing that long. I've been out here for, less than a day at most. And that's when he realizes that the only way that I'm going to handle this job, if I don't plan on, continuously being driven to insanity and run around all over the place, is to go back to the original site. And he ends up going back to the original village where he committed this genocide, assisted in doing so. It's burnt down to the ground and everything. And he runs past it and goes to the flooded rice paddy field. As he wades through the water, he ends up finding this elevated island, and he gets on there and he starts screaming out that, Scarface, you and I are about to have our 1v1. Come out and face me, you spineless motherfucker. And Scarface ends up rising out of the water and going up to him, with the machete ready to get in a one-on-one fight. And right when Scarface is about to attack him, Stone ends up shoving his hands into Scarface through the maggots and rot, holds on to his rib cage, and then pulls them back with them. And you find out that Stone steps on a landmine at that very same time. And it ends with both of them exploding. He ends up metaphysically and physically putting the demons of his past to rest as they both end up getting killed. And yeah, the story fades to black, and you find out that he had to end up paying for his crimes, paying for his misdeeds, but also kind of saving the day and saving the trouble. So that's the story. I'd give this one an 8.5 out of 10. It's very good, very fleshed out story. I love the concept of, being haunted by the demons of your past. The fact that the Vietnam War had a lot of moral and ethical standards that were kind of raised. The idea that even though it's a battlefield, even though you're doing a lot of horrible things, there's still an ethical guideline to follow. And when you break that and lose yourself, the demons of your past are going to haunt you. In this case, it takes the form of Scarface, who's awesome, this 7-foot-tall, giant, rotting zombie, Jason Voorhees build kind of guy who's chasing him throughout the jungle and using witchcraft and black magic to mess with him. And the way that it ends with both of them basically killing each other and finishing off the job and putting it all to rest was pretty badass. I like that climax scene. So it gets a very good an 8.5 out of 10. And the last story in this collection is The Cannibal King. The Cannibal King, not really sure what exact war period it is, but it takes place in Africa with the British rule, so I suspect that it's the Boer Wars. The Boer Wars happened in the beginning of the early 1900s. So that seems to be where the story takes place. And you follow the main character, who I think's named Cruddy. He's this kind of badass, tough, rebellious British soldier who's in this makeshift kind of base camp. And they've been facing off against the Mahdists. They're the African rebels who at the time are fighting, and they've gunned down a bunch of them, got into a lot of bloody battles, and they've been holding off the base camp. And there's outside of the perimeter of their camp, all their rotting corpses are still there. They've not been able to clean them out. And as they're waiting there at the camp, they're waiting for their sergeant, who none of them like because he's a pretentious dickhead, to come back to them. And in the middle of the night, they start hearing crazy sounds, all right? Crazy types of noises, howling, laughing, baying. And they realize that there are packs of hyenas out there who may be stalking and scavenging the kills. And if you don't know what hyenas sound like, I'll play you some audio clips. It's pretty fucked up sounding. And in between the current perspective you get with this main character, you get flashbacks, or I guess perspective shifts, to these three British soldiers who have been kidnapped by this ritualistic, cannibalistic witch who's holding a ritual inside of her hut, and all of them are tied up to stakes, and she's like cutting off pieces of their flesh and making them eat themselves. And she's a wild looking woman, dirty, nasty, animalistic, ritualistic, and they're being tortured in there. So what ends up happening is that since these three men have gone missing, the main character and a group of men are sent out there by the douchebag sergeant to go looking for them. And when they go out there to recon, they're scared that the African rebels might roll up on them. They're wading through the dead corpses, and they start hearing scratching sounds, and they're seeing strange movement out there. So they're trying to make sure that they're not getting snuck up on, and eventually they see an African rebel who's been cut in half, and he's bleeding out, he's dying, and as they're looking at him, they see something from the shadows rush in, grab him, and then drag him back off to be eaten. And before they know it, there are a dozen entities surrounding and staking them out. And they initially think that these are African tribesmen or rebels dressed up in the skins of hyenas, but then they quickly realize that these are not men wearing hyena skins. These are skinwalkers. These are hyena men humanoids, were hyenas. And, if you don't know what a spotted hyena looks like, I'll show some clips up here. They are freaky looking creatures. So these are, yes, spotted hyena humanoids, skinwalkers, who start ripping apart and feasting on the corpses and surrounding these guys. And eventually they end up getting into a shootout, fighting these hyena men and running off, but not before some of their own men are killed. And as the main character gets away, he noticed that these were not normal hyenas. They look like zombified hyena men because they had rotting, decomposing holes in their pelts. They had missing eyeball sockets, and he's mortified at this sight and this encounter. And when he gets back to base, he ends up speaking with this local recon ally that they have, who's a local African who's working with the British Army. And when he ends up trying to have a conversation with them to kind of vent about what happened to him, since no one's going to believe him, the recon guy does believe him. And he ends up telling him this urban legend about this very rich and high status merchant who made a great selling in his business and had a kind of like royal family, who decided that he wanted to get married to this tribeswoman who had, luscious black hair and emerald green eyes, and his parents were very much against it. But the marriage had continued as is, and in Sudan, in this local area, one night his wife had snuck out of bed because she was a local village woman, and she ended up going back to her village or that kind of grounded area. So he ended up following his wife, suspicious as to why she was sneaking out in the middle of the night. And eventually he saw a horrific sight, which is that her and her other clan tribesmen were dressed up in hyena pelts, and they were cannibalistically feasting upon the corpse of a freshly dug up boy. And as he saw it, he realized that she was a cannibal, a ghoul, and he was mortified, so he ran home scared. And as he ran home scared, he ended up getting the sneak up on her, because when she came back, he stabbed and killed her to death. Except he didn't realize that she was not a normal tribeswoman. She was a witch herself. And through black magic, through witchcraft, through the summoning of some demons, she ended up crawling out of the grave as a hyena woman, a hyena humanoid, and ended up sneaking into the night and feasting upon and killing him. And when his dad came in, his dad had taken a sword and sliced her head off. And the moment that she was decapitated, there was the demon which took possession of her that crawled out of her headless body. And it's described to be this grapefruit-sized, swollen, spider-like tick that's hairy, that has a cyclops-like eye, a mouthful of sharp teeth. And he ended up cutting that thing to pieces. And that's when the urban legend happened that there is this tribe of cannibals who had dressed up in hyena pelts, and after they're killed or they give their bodies over to these spider tick-like demons, these parasites will get inside of them and allow them to turn into hyena humanoids, skinwalkers. So he realizes that the threat he's dealing with is supernatural. And after that, he has to hunt down one of the people that he killed, one of the hyena humanoids that he shot down. The recon guy tells him that you didn't kill him because after a few days that entity is going to crawl out of the grave again. And they end up sneaking back to the cemetery where the body is most likely buried, and it ends up, crawling out of the grave, and they have to kill it again and do a whole process that the father in the urban legend did. And eventually the story kind of turns. It goes back to, them getting into gunfights with soldiers, but eventually it ends with, after the gunfight with a bunch of African rebels, the main character is lost out there in the Sudan desert and savannah. And as he is getting back to his base, he's starving, he's lost, he doesn't know what to do, and he quickly realizes that the hyena tribe is hunting him down and stalking him the whole time. And eventually he gets led to a graveyard where the old witch is sitting there on top of a tombstone, and she basically makes him finally give in to his instincts and feast upon a corpse, in which the parasitic demon ends up going inside of his body. And before that, you saw that he ended up getting kidnapped, and she might have done some rituals on him. So he's already been infected, and he turns out to be their new cannibal king to replace the queen. And the story ends with some medical soldiers and other troops basically getting back to the base camp of this British force, and they find that the sergeant is tied up to a pole, and he's been eaten down to like a mummified corpse. Like, he's been stripped of all his flesh and muscle. And the medical guy quickly realizes that this was probably done while he was alive, and they see the corpses of other soldiers that have been feasted upon, and they quickly dismiss it as being, scavenged by hyenas and jackals from the area. But they all secretly have a feeling that with the way these, kills were done, with the way that these guys died, there might be something more to it and something quite off, especially when they see human footprints and hyena-like footprints mixed in the sand all throughout the camp. And the story ends with that iconic hyena baying, whooping, and laughing as it fades to black. So, very morbid story. This one I give a 7.5 out of 10. Pretty good. It is very creepy. I love the idea of spotted hyena, humanoid skinwalkers. Such a cool monster to get were hyenas. And I like the urban legend about these demons, which are like bloated tick parasites that infest you, almost like a Wendigo. The moment that you give in to eating, human meat and become a cannibal, these demons will start infecting you and turn you into this type of entity. But the fact that the story kind of takes a several page intermission, cutting to just Call of Duty type of soldier fights, and then cuts back to the occult storyline, it felt a little kind of all over the place. It almost felt like it was extended on for too long. But that being said, I still think it's a pretty good story, if not mild good. So somewhere between a 7.5 to a 7.8 out of 10. And that's all I got for today. Those are the 3 exclusive stories. You know about them now. And yeah, I really love Horrors of War. So go check it out. Go buy the book. There's also a short story featured in an anthology called Cold War Cthulhu, and his story that he submitted in there is called Innsmouth Vulgaris. But that one features in the Cold War, where Russians may have made a deal with a Lovecraftian god to gain power over the oceans and their navy. And of course, when you make a deal with a Lovecraftian god, things are going to go bad. So that one's basically an unofficial Horrors of War story too, but I'll cover that in a different video called Curran from the Crypt, where I cover short stories that are, not collected within these type of collections. And yeah, I really hope for a sequel. Please make a sequel to Horrors of War. I want a Horrors of War too. If we got a sequel to Alien Horrors, this one deserves it. So Curran, if you're out there, or if the universe is listening, give me 12 more weird horror short stories about the war by Tim Curran, because I love his stuff, and it's super fun, very Isekai Comics feeling, very creature feature, horror action focused, and he really does shine in that. So that's all I got for today. If you enjoyed, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment down below, and stay tuned for more content to come. Deuces.